This next episode is going to be with Dr. Christian Zepp. I met Christian on VSP Plus, which he runs, and I attended the VASPS online summit this year, which is where a lot of different sports psychologists all over the world get together online and kind of share their thoughts about the direction of the industry, what's working, what's not. For many of you that don't know, I'm trying to become a sports psychologist, so I'm early on in the process. I still have to get my master's and PhD. But with that being said, this is a conversation with Dr. Christian Zepp. He's in Germany and I'm in Knoxville, Tennessee, so I'm a bit groggy this episode. I had to film at 7:30 in the morning. I was kind of just rolling out of bed. But with that being said, hope you guys enjoy. Thanks. Alrighty. So I am here with Christian Zepp, a sports psychologist in Germany, and I'll start with a quote that I was just referring to offline, and it comes with Muhammad Ali. He would say a lot of times before a lot of his biggest fights, he would act all brash and confident, but deep down he was always nervous and not necessarily ready for a fight. I know we just talked about it, but I figured I'd go ahead and start with that because it was at the top of my notes. So Christian has been doing sports psychology for how long?
Now since 2011, 2012. Yeah.
2011 and 12. Yeah, this is something that I am starting in my life, and 23, so I'm in the early stages. And so I would like to know a little bit about your journey, about why you gravitated to sports psychology, and how you got to here.
First of all, thank you for the invitation, Sam. It's really a pleasure talking with you today. Excuse me, about the journey about sports psychology. Sports psychology is one of the greatest passions that I have. So where do I begin with my journey here into sports psychology? I think I have to start even before 2011, 2012. I was a volleyball player initially. And at some point, I really didn't like playing volleyball anymore because everyone had to rely on each other. And the team that I was in, everyone was really selfish and only looking after themselves and not really giving 100%. And then I started to run for myself, ran a half marathon, ran a marathon. That got boring. Then I started triathlon. And during while I was doing the triathlons, I really understood how important it is to stay focused, to be concentrated, to be all the time in the moment and really focus on what you're doing right now, even more so than compared to playing volleyball. And that was really the kickoff. So 2001, 2002, when I really got into touch with sports psychology for myself as an athlete. And then, unfortunately, I tried to qualify for Ironman Hawaii in 2003. But unfortunately, my bike broke because I wasn't prepared, because I made a mistake during that competition. And last weekend, I was talking with some people about that. I did a mistake. And I made the mistake because I wasn't prepared. I didn't think about anything that could go wrong or prepare myself for potential situations that could arise during the competition. When I went into that competition, I was 100% confident that I will qualify for Ironman Hawaii and be one of the youngest Germans to that time, then 2003, to qualify for the World Championships. Unfortunately, I didn't qualify. So that was a Saturday, I think. And the Tuesday afterwards, I quit on triathlon. I didn't do that. I didn't want to do that.
Yeah.
Because it was just too much time.
Yeah, definitely. That reminds me of how I came up. I've been playing football, I guess, since I was probably 6 years old, and I had beginner's luck with it and was very good when I was very young. And so through a few different trials and tribulations, my level as far as performance in the sport had gone down. I had my growth stunted in middle school because of this rare illness. And so it got to the point where I was a very focused and cerebral athlete later in high school. And so I was always too much of a team player. If a coach needed me somewhere, I would always be like, yes. I would never backtalk. I would never question a coach. My dad was always my coach growing up. And so with that, I was always just, wherever you need me, coach. And so it got to the end of my junior season, which was my last year. So I would have played probably about 10 or 15 years of football. And my coach came up to me and he was like, you would be starting at cornerback right now, but you're the fifth string receiver. I'm really sorry about that. We can always move you over right now with 2 games into the season. And I was just like, nah, I'm good. I'm good. And so that was the last year that I played. It's always bittersweet when you come to an end at the sports you start with. But yeah, I've been just playing basketball recreationally since then. There always have been a fair few trials and tribulations and issues like you brought up with the bike. I've been trying to teach myself to dunk for the last 4 years, and there have been quite a few injuries on the way, but I finally got it in the last 3 months. I can dunk and I feel like I'm on TV sometimes. But yeah, and so I guess go a little bit into your educational background.
Yeah.
Drove you to the psychology aspect of things, and yeah, go ahead and continue.
Yeah, sure. I'll just add one aspect before I go into the educational part, because that quitting is one of the reasons why I am in sports psychology today, because I realized if I would have had someone like me or someone else in sports psychology back then, I wouldn't have quit. I would have kept going. And I think that is something that I would like to do with other athletes today, or that this is something that I'm doing today with athletes, to help them understand what happened, why it happened, and how they can benefit from that experience. And after triathlon, I got back into volleyball, or basically back into volleyball as a volleyball coach, the Indian national volleyball team for disabled athletes for quite some time. And there, on that international level, I got a completely different perspective on how important sports psychology is. And once I got back to Germany, I then firstly started working with some Formula One drivers as a sports scientist. And then the position at the German Sports University in Cologne became available to me at the Institute of Psychology. And then I got into academia. And I started working on my PhD back then in 2009. And in 2011, I started my practical training to become a sports psychology professional here in Germany. I'm a sports scientist by heart originally, and I did my PhD in sports psychology plus additional education in sports psychology. Plus, right now I'm studying again. I'm studying coaching, mediation, supervision, and change management again to add some more to my work, to my toolbox. And since 2012, I'm now working in the applied field of sports psychology. And I have a 50% position at the university right now that's going until March 2024. And afterwards, I'm exclusively working in applied sports psychology then. Yeah, so it's basically my educational path so far.
Yeah, we're on a similar path. I've graduated from undergraduate, and I'm actually going back to do a couple semesters of postgrad courses because I goofed off a bit to start school. I'm in the process of trying to bulk up my master's application, and then I should be coming on over to Germany with you guys.
Excellent.
Yeah. But so what does I guess you do sports consulting, sports psychology consulting. What does your framework look like as far as guiding some of these athletes?
Yeah. So my framework my philosophy basically is that other way around. One of the basic notions that I have, or the basic perspectives that I have, is that I'm always working person-centered, client-centered, focusing on Carl Rogers' developments, focusing on the fully functioning person. And sometimes it's quite difficult for coaches, for athletes to focus on exactly that, on the fully functioning person. The basic notion in my work is that everyone has his or her own answers already. They just don't know yet. And I see myself as someone who's able to facilitate that, who's able to help and support other people to identify what they need and where they want to go and how they want to pursue their goals and maybe also achieve their goals. That's what I think. And obviously, then there are some times where my knowledge as a sports psychology professional is necessary, or my knowledge as a, coach or athlete, or simply a human being, a father, a brother, is maybe necessary to be shared if the client in front of me asks for that. So I'm never sharing anything if it's not okay for the client to hear that. I'm always offering, but people can reject and say, no, I don't like to hear that now. So it's always, for me, in my framework, about the person in front of me, and it's never about the fame. Some people might go into sports and they say, yeah, I want to be in the stands or on the field, I want to be on the pictures and in the videos. Actually, when I'm traveling with national teams, for example, I'm always trying to sit in the stands somewhere behind where no one sees me, because it's not me who's important. The athletes are important, the coaches are important, but I'm not important. And so that's something that's really important to me.
Definitely. Yeah, you like to immerse yourself within the grand scale of athletics itself. It's the way I've always thought it. I've always been integrated into team sports. And so one thing that I was looking at, so you look at, I guess, the individual first and foremost. And so I guess you're more so trying to outline the goals of the individual. And I imagine that phase of consulting more so illuminates the guiding philosophy behind each athlete. Is that the case?
Yeah, that's right. So I really try to understand the human behind the athlete first. And sometimes that's really difficult. And sometimes not only behind the athletes, it's also the human behind the coach. In sports psychology, we still predominantly talk about working with athletes, working with teams, but we shall not forget the coaches, as they are really important, as they are facilitators themselves. And if they are not well, their athletes can't be well. So it's always about the human behind the athlete, the human behind the coach, understanding where someone comes from, where someone strives to go. And once we know that, we can then develop strategies and ideas on how to reach that. Sometimes that process really takes a couple of years, because it's sometimes not even clear to the athletes or the coaches where they like to go. Many of them say, yeah, I want to go to the Olympic Games, but that's just a distant goal somewhere in the future. Sometimes it's different things, like wanting to win a medal at World Championships or something else. But sometimes even those goals are just expressions behind which other goals live. Let's frame it that way. And understanding those goals and helping athletes and coaches to understand their own goals, that's one of my ideas. And then most definitely also help them to show their best possible performance in any given situation. That's what I consider really important. Yeah.
Yeah. What would you consider to be some of the best practices or best tips for an athlete in a high performance situation?
That's a difficult question. Yeah.
Just a couple of basic practices that you try to instill in a majority of your athletes.
Sure. So one of the approaches that I really use a lot is acceptance commitment therapy. And I really use ACT a lot. I'm not a therapist, to be clear and honest here. I'm not a therapist, and ACT, it's not only therapy, it's also training, maybe acceptance commitment training. And that's how I like to frame it when I use it, when I work with people. And that is something that I really like to use a lot. So acceptance is key, I think. Being mindful is key. And knowing your values is key. If you do not know why you do what you do, then you can't do it at all, or you can't do it as good as possible. That's at least my opinion. And if you're unable to stay in the moment, you're unable to focus, you're unable to concentrate. And if you're standing in the box at table tennis, for example, and you're always focusing on what's happening next, you're missing the next ball. And table tennis, it's 140 kilometers per hour that the ball travels across that table. And if you're not focused on that ball, you're losing the game faster than you can say what just happened. So being mindful, accepting that emotions are there, accepting that several thoughts might occur, that is something that I always try to share with athletes and coaches. And that's my go-to strategy or my go-to story is the one from Michael Phelps from 2008 at the Olympic Games in Beijing. And his sentence that he always used his question that he always used was, what's important now? At least that he's sharing that question with everyone in his book, and No Limits, I think. And what's important now is, for me, the perfect question to ask, as it always reminds you in every given moment to be focused, to be in the moment right now, not somewhere else. What's important now? And if you abbreviate that question from what's important now, if you make it an acronym, it's WIN, and that's a word in English no one ever forgets if you're an athlete or a coach or whoever you like it to be. So it's WIN. What's important now? And that's the number one strategy, the number one question that I'm sharing with everyone, if they want to hear it or not, because it just helps us to become really present in the present moment.
Definitely. The little tidbit about Michael Phelps reminds me of something I saw online. Trevor Lawrence, who I guess just lost over the weekend in the playoffs to the Kansas City Chiefs, they, I guess, consulted with Jocko Willink, who I'm sure, and so they had their little phrase was good, regardless of if he threw 4 interceptions or if he scored a touchdown or if they lost by a lot or won by a lot. His response and the team's response was always good, and it was about that acceptance of even the bad things or learning moments and the good things, accomplishments that you want to tell people about, or they're on the come up on TV. And so I always think it's very interesting and very important to always have some guiding philosophy behind why you're doing what you're doing.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Regarding the good, I can relate 100%. 100%. And at the same time, when I read Jocko Willink's books, I know from his personal background, his professional background, that he also was in situations where things weren't good, although he said it's good. And I'm always a bit cautious about using that good in some situations, because some situations in life are just bad, really bad. And I really can't see any good in it. For example, a person dies. What's good in that situation? So there are some limits, I'd say, to situations where good is appropriate, and at the same time, in many situations, or in some situations at least, good, for me personally, it wouldn't be appropriate. But when you only look at sports, I 100% agree that good is a good answer or a good reaction to something or a situation, because yes, you can always learn from it. No matter if you won or lost, it's good that it happened that way, because next year you have a chance to do it better maybe, or during the next match. And that loss today or yesterday helps you understand where you can improve in order to reach your goals.
Yeah. And so I almost think we often like to focus on the bad, like you said, in the midst of death or some other overpowering troubles. And so I think a lot of the time it takes us a bit of time to find the good in those great struggles. And so it's impossible to focus on the good when it comes to death and when it comes to an immense loss after great preparation. But there's always something to learn. For instance, one of the worst moments of my life was my grandfather's death, which was, I guess, 3 years ago in 3 days. So it's burned into my memory.
Yeah.
But that was one of the worst moments of my life. And the ensuing months after it was when COVID started. And so I went through a lot of pain within a short period of time. And it was definitely not good. It was definitely not good. But I also got to see the man in front of me, a man who I was very proud of, a man who influenced me, took care of me, loved me, was a very hardworking man. And months after the fact, I was able to extract that good. And that good has become great. And that great is what gets me up in the morning. And it's the reason I'm here. And so it also reminded me of, I was scrolling through your book club on your website, and it's a book I actually just powered through last week, but Man's Search for Meaning. I had read about half of it, and then last week I was just like, let's power through. And so it's almost, if you can find a meaning in your struggle, you're much more likely to make it through. If you have some overarching goal that extends beyond the present pain, you're able to recognize the big picture and keep surviving.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
100%. 100%. Thank you for sharing that with your grandfather right now. I think in many situations in life, there are things that are good or that can be good or that we can learn in the future. Today, we might not see what's good in that situation. There will be some time in the future where we will look back and understand why it was good that it happened exactly that way and not in any other way. As you just said, Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning. If people ask me, what's the number one book that you recommend to other people that everyone should read, it's that book, Man's Search for Meaning. There are more and more horrendous books about the Holocaust in Germany, about Auschwitz, about the concentration camps. There are more difficult books to read compared to that. And at the same time, it's full of wisdom with what Viktor Frankl shared there as a physician in the concentration camp Auschwitz, and how he managed to stay there. And for example, in the situation where he was able to flee the concentration camp, he decided to stay and to fulfill his meaning and work with and support those inmates, you can call them inmates, who weren't able to speak up for themselves or to take care of themselves, as he had the obligation for himself. That's what he felt, to help them as a physician. And inside that book, there are so many things that wonderfully relate to mindfulness today, to acceptance, to values, which all, again, at some point comes back to act on the one hand, and to my personal mindset as a human being, as a sports psychology professional, as an athlete, as a father, that helps me be the person that I'd like to be. Not sure if I always make it, but at least it helps me to be there as good as possible.
One interesting thing from the book that kind of maps onto athletics and to life itself, I remember reading a lot about how the Jewish prisoners, a lot of them with a good moral standing, a lot of the ones who you would consider good men, weren't the ones who ended up surviving, because they had that selflessness in them and they weren't necessarily looking to focus on themselves. And so you see that in athletics a lot of the time. The best man, as far as life, doesn't necessarily win in life. The ones that are willing to step on their fellow brother are often the times the ones that succeed the most. I don't know. This isn't really a question, but it's something that's hard to grapple with, because that's something that I'm super committed to. As far as me, I would like to keep this mindset of morals and of respect for your fellow brother in life, but it's hard to grapple with when you see the people that are succeeding. You look at Michael Jordan, who is, by all accounts, had probably some psychopathic leanings. The same goes with probably Cristiano Ronaldo and some of the greatest soccer players of all time. And it almost shows how to be maybe the best of the best, it's not a prerequisite, but it's often the case that there is a little bit of mental disorder there that drives you to become the greatest, but it also may deteriorate the relationships around you. Tom Brady, for example, just got divorced before his 20th season. And so it's interesting. It's not much of a question, but just a bit of an observation.
Yeah, but I think it's a very important point, Sam, that you're raising here. And we've been discussing that in a group of sports psychology professionals a couple of years ago, when it came to what do athletes need in order to be really successful in their sport, to become a world champion, to become an Olympic champion. What do they need? And what is it that we can do together with them? And how can we as sports psychology professionals work with them to support them in that way? And we ask ourselves the question, ultimately then, after our discussion, if we really want to support every one of them. Because obviously, as you're saying, if you really want to become the best of the best, you need to be egotistical at some points. You need to be willing to walk across dead bodies. You need to be willing to only focus on yourself. And then it's the question, is that who I'd like to be as a human being, if I really need that in order to be the most successful person in my sport, maybe. And I understand my job and how I work with people to help them identify their values, their norms. I like to help them develop their moral compass, so to speak, to then make a conscious decision. How do I have to behave? What is it that I can do in order to become the most successful person in my sport? And is it also okay for me if I'm not becoming world champion or Olympic champion, because I kept following my norms and values. And because I stick to myself, I was true to myself throughout my whole career. It's okay that I did not become the most decorated, I have no idea, athlete in my sport. And I think that's really important to have both sides here. And as you say, the really successful ones, those who earn millions, they don't care. At least, I don't know them personally, many of them, at least that's what we can read in the newspapers or in the magazines or on internet. And at the same time, there are really successful athletes who do care a lot and who are honest, who are true to themselves, and who share what they have, no matter in which sport. I think we have those negative examples and we have some examples, but we all have to be just aware of exactly that.
Yeah, it's hard because you and me aren't necessarily participating in these high-level athletics where there's not much of a scarcity mindset, where I am, in a sense, rooting for your success. You're rooting for all the success of the other sports psychologists. We're just wishing that the field would, all in all, just move forward. But in athletics, it is inherently scarce. There is parity built into it. There can only be one winner in most circumstances. And in life, it's not necessarily like that. We would all like to be moving in the same direction for the most part. I think a lot of us would agree. So I guess the scarcity of the prizes is maybe what drives people to throw away their morals or to throw away their concern for their fellow man. So it's something that's tough to grapple with, but we all get into sports in a sense because of the competition. So I like the friendly competition that I have at the gym playing pickup basketball, but when it comes to winning and when a win has a contract on the line and when, you're worried about feeding your family, it gets to a bit of a different place.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. There's always something to be lost. And I don't have it here. I just finished reading Ryan Holiday's Courage is, I don't know. And I think it takes courage, apart from reading that book and apart from just finishing that book, it takes courage to really make a stand for yourself and say, all right, if it's not possible, yes, then I am losing my contract. And yes, it takes courage to make a decision that you might lose a client if it's not in line with your values. I did that in the past. I did that once in the past, 2018, I think it was. No, 2019 it was. I was working in soccer for 3 or 4 years then, and I just realized I'm not efficient in what I'm doing here. I realized that my personal well-being really suffered because I wasn't efficient. I was trying to offer, et cetera, but nothing really happened. And I just realized that the values in soccer, in that club, or in soccer in general, and in that club in specific, didn't align with my personal values. And then it really took me half a year, and I really liked that club back then. When I started working there, I really liked that club. And then working for that club, I really understood it's completely different. It's not in line with anything that I value. And then it took me half a year to decide I'm going away from that sport. I'm going away from that job. And in Germany, most money is in soccer. There is where you can earn money. And I went away from a good contract and decided then in the summer of 2019, I'm not going to do that anymore. I had a lot of time suddenly, but it just felt right. And it still feels right. And I'm still glad that I didn't do that. I think we have to make a stand for ourselves. And at the same time, I can totally understand if people are unable to do that, at least for a time, because they depend on the money to pay for their rent and their food. I can totally understand. And then I think it's on them to create an alternative for themselves. Or I didn't manage to achieve that, or to change the system, to change the sport, to change the club. At the same time, then we have to ask the question, but is that my job then? And if they hire me to improve the performances of their athletes, it's not my job to change the system or the organization or to pursue some change management inside the club.
Yeah. If you will, maybe touch on what some of those values were that you weren't in alignment with, because as an American, globalization works in weird ways. I would much now rather watch soccer than any of my sports. It's just a better TV viewing experience for me. And so I've gotten into it a lot the past few years. And I've seen myself in the future maybe working in soccer from a psychology perspective. But what were some of your issues and hangups with the culture around your club and around the sport in general?
Yeah, I'm sure that's not exclusive to soccer. I'm sure it's not. And at the same time, I'm fortunate that almost all other experiences that I'm making in other sports are different, and probably others would have problems with how people behave in other sports. So I think that's normal. But to answer your question, it's been the way that junior athletes have been viewed, for example, or athletes in general. They were talking, and I'm sure it's the same thing in other sports, but they were only talking about players as player material. So what's the material that we have for the next season, for example? And if people talk about that, to talk about 16-year-old boys like being material, I have a problem with that. If coaches talk about their athletes like being, or like having a learning disability, I have a problem with that, because maybe they, as coaches, have a teaching disability, at least with some athletes. Then it came down to how coaches talked with each other, over each other, behind their backs, about each other. I had a problem with coaches from lower teams trying to talk bad about coaches who were in teams above them just to get their position. I had a problem with athletes earning so much money, spending 150 euros for a white t-shirt and complaining about that the balls aren't fully pumped when they start practicing, without ever doing anything for themselves or trying to take responsibility for themselves and for the team. And maybe I wasn't able to work with individual athletes inside the club as I should have done it. Maybe I wasn't able to work with the teams as I should have done it. I have no idea. But nothing really changed inside the club there. At some point I tried to, and that's basically one of the projects that I was proud of, and I'm still proud of from working inside the club, was that after so many athletes really complained about the bad circumstances under which they were training, etc., and at the same time earning so much money, I said, let's make it a project to hand out food to homeless people at the train station every Monday night during winter. And we did that. And the reason for that was that I wanted to show those soccer players what life really looks like if you open your eyes and not only spend time in the safe environment of your club where everything's okay, and that there's a lot more to life and a lot more things that are not working out, and that those things are a lot worse than not having your black roll cleaned by the physiotherapist after the training.
Yeah, definitely. It is a lot of, like I said earlier, a lot of scarcity mindset.
Yes.
As opposed to abundance mindset. That reminds me of quite a few different athletes that I've seen and friends that I've had. And it's brutal because there's really no room for that egotism in my sense, because you have Michael Jordan, you have Tom Brady, you have Messi, you have Ronaldo, you have these greatest athletes of all time. And odds are it's not going to be one of us. Just, it's simple and it's the way it is. And so I feel like when you have these people that are so focused in every moment on winning, they throw away the real important aspects of life. And it's something that's hard to grapple with. I've got a kid that I play pickup basketball with that is talking about the schools he's going to commit to. And it's, yes, buddy, you're good at basketball, but you're not going to go anywhere. You play pickup basketball with me. I mean, it's hard. And that's one thing that I've always loved about sport, was just the fun behind it. I remember when I very first started, my dad told me, if it's not fun, don't play. I tried every single sport that was essentially offered here in East Tennessee, and the ones that I didn't find fun, I didn't play. And that a lot at the highest level too. A lot of the highest level performance athletes are out there having fun, especially in the team sports. And so it's always about like, how can you harness that? Because I feel like it's much easier to get into flow state when you're enjoying the process than it is to get into it when every ounce of your being is focused on winning.
100%. Yeah.
So it's something that's hard to grapple with because I feel like you eventually burn out and you lose your holding. You lose whatever is grounding you when you are so focused on winning. And so what are your thoughts on that?
You can't force flow, right? That's a contradiction in itself. Mm-hmm. So it's just like a black sun. Forcing flow doesn't work. And if it's not, at the same time, I was almost saying if it's not fun, then just don't do your sport. But for many athletes, they're earning their money with their sport. And my job isn't fun every single day, 24/7, which is okay. But I'm still doing it because I know why I'm doing that. So I think, you need to know why you do your sport. And through that why comes the enjoyment that you can have. And one thing that I was thinking about, we're only talking about those negative examples right now. Maybe I'm not sure about Tom Brady, etc. But if you look at some soccer players, because I was so negatively talking about soccer players, there are also some positive examples. And I think that's really important. I just read last weekend, Sadio from, I think, Liverpool FC or so, not sure. He's spending part of his salary that he receives to create a city out of the village that he came from originally in Africa. And he just built a $300,000 school. He built a post office. He built a hospital inside his village to improve the lives of the people inside the village that he comes from. And there are other examples from athletes who are spending 1%, 10% of their salaries to help and improve the lives of other people. So I think having and knowing about the responsibility that we all have for the larger community and maybe also for the world is also very helpful and beneficial, and then can at the same time create some reason for why am I doing that sport. Maybe I do not like playing soccer anymore, but I still keep doing it because I'm earning money with that to build the villages in Africa. I have no idea. Whatever the reason, whatever the why, whatever the purpose behind what you're doing, it really doesn't matter as long as you have a purpose. And that purpose should be more than only accumulating 200 million more per year on your own bank account so that you can buy a new Rolls Royce for your wife for Christmas.
Yeah.
Sorry about that reference.
Yeah, I get it. I'm actually a Liverpool fan, and so I see Sadio Mane. He shows up to the games with his cracked iPhone. It always cracks me up. He got an old broken phone, and he's making far more money than most of us could ever imagine. But it reminds me of my favorite basketball player of all time, LeBron James. I got to, I guess, watch his whole career. I was, I think, 3 or 4 years old when he was drafted and when he started playing. And so I've got to see everything. And so it touches on his philosophy and on his big picture mindset, because I think in the last couple of years, he was able to donate enough money to do what Sadio Mane did. And he built a school in inner city Akron, which is a very underprivileged area, the area that he's from in Ohio. And so he's really created a lot of change in his hometown and made it a better place. But it also touches on his philosophy and mindset behind sports, which I'll be able to admit that I think Michael Jordan is probably a overall better player. He's accomplished more. He's won more championships. But something that I've always admired about LeBron James is his philosophy and the way he thinks about the game, because he doesn't have that ego that you would expect from the best player in the world. When it comes down to the end of the game in basketball, it's like, pass it to the best player on the court, let him take the shot. No matter if he's got 2 guys on him or 3 guys on him, we trust him to take the shot. And I've always respected LeBron because he always put his trust in his teammates. If he was double teamed, he would pass to the open man and he would trust that that guy would take a good shot. And a lot of times he would pass it to the bench players, the role players, and he would always put his trust in his teammates And I think that mindset of focusing on the big picture and focusing on the whole could be really beneficial for a lot of these athletes, because after all, LeBron went to 9 straight finals. He broke that record. And with Tom Brady, I know he's a lot of times called out for his character, but to be a quarterback of a football team, you have really got to be in tune with the mindset of everybody else on the field. And so I know he's come off as egotistical at times, but align a building of hundreds of people, because a football team is very large, be able to align the interests of hundreds of people is a challenge in itself. And I'll bring up another book and figure that I've found very inspiring lately, and it's Teddy Roosevelt. And Tom Brady's, I guess, Netflix series Man in the Arena was actually named after a famous Teddy Roosevelt speech. I think Teddy is, a person that a lot of athletes should be gravitating to, considering the challenges that he faced in his life. And I think he would really benefit a lot of people. He was told at a young age that he would never live past his adolescence because of his severe asthma. And he went on to climb the Matterhorn on his honeymoon. And and in his early 20s, I think both his mother and his wife died on the same day. And he went on to become the governor of New York. And he constantly had these tremendous bouts of adversity in his life and was always able to find a way through, and then became the only third-party president that the U.S. has ever had. And so I've got the Man in the Arena speech hung up over my computer right here. And I think it's something that a lot of us could use, because it's essentially talking about how the credit doesn't belong to the people who are talking down or the people who are criticizing. The credit belongs to the man who's actually in the arena, who is marred by dust and sweat and blood, and who strives valiantly and comes short again and again. And so it's one thing that I'm trying to do with my career is just put myself out there. And so, it's something that I respect, because you're deeper into your career. And at some point down the line, or at some point in the past, you were like, I want to do this. I'm going to put myself on the line. I'm going to switch gears from an academic perspective or whatever it is. I've been rambling for a minute, but maybe you could talk on some of your philosophical influences when it comes to sports.
Yeah, absolutely. Sam, I can 100% relate to what you just shared. Also, the Roosevelt speech here, A Man in the Arena. And I just had the same expression just in my mind while you were talking. So you need to put yourself out there, no matter in which context, no matter in which setting you are in, depending on what you'd like to achieve. You just have to put yourself out there. No one's coming to your door and knock and ask you to become the president of the United States of America. You have to put yourself out there in order to be recognized. And the same is true for playing soccer, football, table tennis, or curling. It really doesn't matter. You just have to put yourself out there and do the work. You have to go out there and swim if you like to across the North Channel between Ireland and Scotland. You have to put yourself out there. It might be that you will fail, but at least you tried, and no one can really criticize you for that. It's what you like to do. And if you fail, so what? You learn. Good. As you just said earlier today in our conversation, if you're there as the man in the arena, you will be criticized. People will not like what you're doing, what you're saying, how you're behaving. It's okay, as long as you're not disrespectful. Maybe people will be jealous on your abilities. Maybe they will criticize you because they are not brave enough to put themselves out there. Maybe they would like to be there, but they simply do not have the courage to do. Courage is calling. That's what the book's called. Yeah, and I think that sums up part of the philosophy that I have on sports. You have to put yourself out there. You have to be courageous. You have to sign up for those competitions in order to see if you're better than others, I'm 41 today. It's today, for me, not anymore competing with others. It's only and exclusively competing with myself. And I really enjoy that. And I believe I would have been a better athlete in the past if I would have had that a lot more, competing with myself, because then I'm really focused on what I'm doing here and now, in that very moment, on that very part of the race. And eventually, I might have been faster, or I might be faster, and then maybe come in a better position in the results list afterwards. So it's really just staying in the moment. And the same is true then also for the professional career. Staying in the moment. What's important now? What's important right now at that point in my career? And that's a question that you can ask yourself at the age of 23. And I'm asking myself that constantly at the age of 41. What's important now? And for me, what's important now is developing my skills further so that I can make the transition from sports psychology into change management, into the corporate world, to use the knowledge that I gathered in sports for the corporate world, and vice versa. Or working with tactical populations and spinning this knowledge back and forth and helping different people benefit from the different knowledges, different experiences that I was fortunate enough to make in the past. So that's part of my answer to philosophy. Does that answer part of your question?
Yeah, we're just chit-chatting here. It's expounding on things. So you talk about what's important now, and I think that is something that kind of closely aligns with Stoicism. I know you've read a lot of Ryan Holiday's books, and I actually haven't read any of his books, but I keep up with him on YouTube, and I try to read a lot of the Stoics, as in I've read Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius and some Seneca. And so it is very important to focus on the present. If you dwell on the past, you're more likely to be tripped up by it, I feel, in some sense. And so it's a lesson I pulled from Man's Search for Meaning. It's use the past to generate principles for the future, and then for the future, have some sense of tragic optimism. In the face of hardship, have the optimism that you're going to be able to make it through. And it's really important to stay grounded and to stay in the moment, because these great tragedies that have happened in the past can overwhelm us, and these elaborate goals can often paralyze us. And yeah, the present is something that's incredibly important, and I think it could work across all industries. I know you're working into change management, and so I think if we all started to focus on the present, be it in a corporate setting or be it it would go a long way. And also talk about your transition now into you said change management.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm just in the process of that right now. So I'm studying that again. I'm doing another master at the moment, and it's change management, organizational development. That's something that I like to know more about, mediation, supervision, especially mediation. So in order to be able to help people solve or at least manage conflicts a lot better, which is also tremendously important inside sports, between coaches and athletes, between coaches and coaches, between the coaches, athletes, and federations. And yeah, I believe that, or I know that many principles that we're using in sports psychology help or can help other people, other contexts, other organizations outside of sports as well. I have a colleague who's working a lot with surgeons, for example, with paramedics. In the United States, it's a lot more advanced. They're a lot more sophisticated than other countries today. But yeah, at least they're using a sports psychology knowledge or performance psychology knowledge for more target groups to only athletes, especially also, for example, with the US Army, working with tactical populations. And if they can use it, paramedics can use it, surgeons can use it, et cetera, et cetera. I have a colleague who's a special forces agent in Germany, and he just had last week's Friday, I think he conducted a 36-hour workshop with surgeons, which is just great because they have to be focused and concentrated for just those long times. Yeah, making transitions here, using the knowledge that we have and make that knowledge available for more people. I think that's one task that we all have and should.
Yeah, and it's tough. One big thing about sports is that it's recreation. It's something you do in between waking up and going to sleep. And when you're working with tactical units or surgeons, you don't know if you're going to be going to sleep once you wake up. You're often dealing with the fear of death or the fear of your patient's death.
Yeah.
I would be very interested to see how the philosophy between sports and the philosophy between the military and surgeons are different and how they are similar. Just a lot of different things to focus on. But I know we've been talking, I guess, for about an hour or so. Yeah. So I'll go ahead and say the only reason we're talking here is I was putting myself out there and trying to find things to do to better my chances of moving forward in the career. And so I found VSP Plus. and I met you through there, and I attended the virtual summit, I guess a few months ago now. And so maybe talk about your work, VSP Plus. And I'll say, for one, it's very cool that with globalization, I can talk to somebody on the other side of the world and it feel like we're right here in the same room. And it's interesting, and just maybe expound on what you're trying to do with VSP.
Yeah, sure. In 2018, I attended ASP conference in Toronto, and I flew there, had a good time there. But when I was sitting in Toronto at the airport again on my flight back home, I was thinking about, was it really worth it now spending 2,000 euros for traveling back and forth and staying 1 week here, etc., not working, blah, blah, blah. And I thought I should do, it was 2018. There should be other ways on how to connect with people, share knowledge, etc. And for me, one very important thing in sports psychology is to share knowledge so that we can all work together and help the profession of sports psychology move forward. And in 2018, there were only few online summits. Then I developed a VASP Virtual Applied Sports Psychology Summit for 2019, the first time. I think it was late October back then when it aired first. And unfortunately afterwards, and then we had 120 or so attendants from all around the world, from Australia to Brazil, all around the world, which was just great. And then we had COVID hit our wonderful Earth, and then it just changed the landscape of virtual summits a bit, because suddenly everyone had to do a virtual summit because no one was allowed to travel. And since then, we've further developed VASP and added a community with the VSP Plus, or Virtual Sports Psychology Plus, to help people connect with each other. We're not where we want to be, or where I'd like to be with that community. I'm still working on that and trying to learn, and because it's not my first profession, it's just practicing and trying a bit and improving and changing some things here. But I hope that we can create a community here with people who like to learn from each other, who are open to, and that's a thing that's really important to me, who are open to share what they know, share their experiences, so that other people are not making the same mistakes that they made. I'm trying to share my experiences and my failures that I did in the past, so that other people are not making the same mistakes again in the future. And yeah, we'll see where we're going. It's an idea, it's a project, and we'll see how it works out.
Yeah, great. It was great talking with you. Hopefully we can continue some bit of a relationship in the future.
Absolutely.
Coming over to Germany at some point. But again, thanks for sitting down. And I know you've got a busy day, so I'll let you get back to what you're doing over in Germany.
Thank you, Sam. Yeah, thank you for the invitation. Once you're here, always let me know. I'm in Cologne. I'm looking forward to show you around if you're here. And apart from that, always feel free to reach out. Same applies to everyone else. So if there are any questions about sports psychology, where you think I could help, could be of any kind of support, just let me know. Always happy to help.
Yeah, definitely so. I appreciate it, Christian. Sorry, I'm getting blown up here with messages. But yeah. Thank you again, and we'll continue this relationship in the future. So have a good one.
Thank you. You too.